You know that specific moment at the end of the meal, the bill arriving at the table, the brief silence before someone picks it up and says what they always say? Should we just split it? And you think about your order, the water, the pasta, no starter, no dessert, no bottle of wine, that appeared somewhere between the second and third course on someone else's suggestion. And across the table, 2 bottles of wine, 4 starters, 3 desserts, the more expensive cut, the cocktails, and the same question directed at everyone, including you. Should we just split it? And your answer is different from the one the table expects. Not because you cannot afford your share of someone else's wine, because you know exactly what your share of the evening was, and it was not the same number as everyone else's. While the table reaches for the calculation that makes the evening feel equal without asking whether it was. Here is what almost nobody calculates about splitting the bill evenly. The split is never just a calculation. It is a transfer. When 6 people sit down to dinner and agree in advance, explicitly or implicitly, that the bill will be divided equally at the end, something happens to the evening that would not happen otherwise. People order differently. The second bottle of wine that might have felt expensive on an individual bill feels reasonable when divided by 6. The starter that was marginal becomes easier to justify. The dessert that was unnecessary arrives at the table because someone else ordered it first, and the cost of saying yes is only a fraction of what it actually costs. And at the end of the evening, the person who ordered the water and the pasta pays the same number as the person who ordered the cocktail, the wine, the starter, the main, and the dessert. Not because they consumed the same, because the social mechanism of equal division treated the bill as a shared object rather than an individual account. The transfer is real. It is not malicious. Most of the people at the table are not thinking about it. They are thinking about the evening, the conversation, the company, the pleasure of the meal. And the bill is just the administrative conclusion of a pleasant night out. But the transfer happened. And it will happen again next month and the month after that. Quietly, automatically. Never appearing in any budget as a line item called what it actually is, a subsidy, paid in small amounts to the spending habits of everyone else at the table. There is a name for why people spend more at a group dinner than they would ordering the same food alone. Researchers call it diffusion of financial responsibility. Uri Ganizi and colleagues, publishing in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization in 2004, documented what happens when people know in advance that a bill will be split equally. They spend significantly more than they would paying individually. The mechanism is straightforward. When the cost of any individual item is divided across the whole table, the personal cost of ordering it drops, even though the total does not. Each person partially funds everyone else's consumption while having their own consumption partially funded in return. The result is a group that spends more than any of its members would alone. Never splitting the bill evenly is not a refusal of generosity. It is the recognition that equal division actively changes what people order, and that the person who doesn't participate in that shift ends up paying for it anyway. And that mechanism operates inside a culture that made splitting even the generous thing to do. For years, the social script has been clear. The person who asks for separate checks is making the evening transactional. They are the one who brought spreadsheets to a dinner party. They are calculating, and calculating at a table is the social equivalent of reminding everyone that the evening has a price. Never splitting the bill evenly is not being the person who calculates. It is the refusal to let a social norm designed to make evenings feel generous quietly redistribute money from people who ordered less to people who ordered more on every ordinary evening without anyone naming what is happening. And the numbers confirm what the separate check already knew. The difference between what someone who consistently orders less pays under equal division versus paying only what they ordered is not dramatic on any single evening. $15, $20, sometimes $30. But across 20 dinners a year, that is $300 to $600 transferred, silently, annually, to the consumption habits of others, appearing in no budget, named by no one, accepted as the cost of being someone who does not make an issue of it. 3 forces. A social mechanism that inflates group spending by distributing individual costs. A culture that made equal division the language of generosity, and individual accounting the language of meanness. And a difference, sometimes small, sometimes not, always invisible, that accumulates quietly across every ordinary evening where nobody examined the assumption. It was there the first time the evening was calculated, afterwards, not as an exercise in grievance, just as curiosity, writing down what had actually been ordered and what the equal share had cost, and finding a difference that was not enormous, but was consistent, and had been consistent for longer than had been noticed, because it had never been assembled as a single number before. It was there, the dinner, when someone said, "Let's just split it," and there was a moment, very brief, of looking down at the plate. The pasta, the water, no wine. The quiet arithmetic of what that number was versus what the split would be, held for a second, then let go, because it was easier not to say anything. It was there, the dinner with the second bottle of wine that nobody asked about before ordering, the one that appeared and was divided by the table as though it had been a collective decision, which it had not been, not exactly, and the specific quality of paying for something that was not a decision but arrived as something already settled, with a price already attached. It was there the first time the words were said, "Can we do separate checks?" And the brief pause that followed, the slight recalibration in the table's understanding of who was there, and the discovery that the evening survived it entirely without difficulty, that the food was the same, the conversation was the same, the laughter was the same, and the only thing that changed was the number at the bottom of the individual bill, which was lower and accurate and did not require anyone to feel that something had been taken. It was there, the year of noticing. Not tracking, not calculating obsessively, just noticing. How many evenings a year the question came up, and how different the answer felt when it was the right one rather than the convenient one, and how little the table minded once the moment passed. These are not people who never treat anyone to dinner. Some of them are among the most generous people at the table, the ones who pick up the bill on a birthday without being asked, who insist on paying when someone is going through a difficult month, who add quietly to the tip without mentioning it. What they do not do is accept the automatic assumption that equal division is the default, that the social ease of splitting evenly is worth the transfer it requires from people who ordered less to people who ordered more. On an ordinary evening, when nobody made a collective decision about how much to spend, and nobody asked whether everyone was comfortable with what was being ordered. They are the person who, when the bill arrives and the table reaches instinctively for the division, says something simple and unhurried. "I'm happy to do separate. I only had the pasta and the water." That is not someone who doesn't understand generosity. That is someone who knows exactly what generosity costs and chooses when to extend it rather than having it extracted automatically by a social norm that nobody agreed to out loud. They do not feel the social discomfort of the separate check the way the table expects them to. That discomfort was examined, found to be entirely about the optics of the moment and not at all about anything real, and set aside, without drama, a long time ago. Now, finally, the objection. It's just dinner. Life is too short to calculate every cent with your friends. Sometimes the generosity of splitting even is the point. It keeps things simple. It keeps the evening easy, and the few dollars either way aren't worth the awkwardness. This is not about refusing to treat a friend, or calculating to the cent on every occasion. There are moments where splitting evenly is exactly the right thing. A birthday, a celebration, a meal where the point is the togetherness, and the individual order is beside the point. Nothing here argues against those moments. This is about the default, the automatic reach for equal division on an ordinary Tuesday that nobody examined, where one person ordered considerably more, and the mechanism of equal division treated that as a shared decision when it was not. And the life is too short argument carries less weight than it assumes. The awkwardness of asking for separate checks lasts approximately 45 seconds. The transfer it prevents repeats every time the table reaches for the same assumption. One is a moment. The other is a pattern. And patterns, unlike moments, accumulate into numbers that eventually become visible. The people who never split the bill evenly are not making dinner awkward. They are simply refusing to let the ease of an evening be funded by a transfer that nobody named and nobody agreed to. Here is what most people get backwards. The person who always splits evenly, who reaches for the familiar calculation, accepts the social ease of equal division, and pays a number that has no relationship to what they actually ordered, is not being generous. They are accepting a transfer that moves money from people who ordered less to people who ordered more, in a social context designed to make that transfer feel like fairness. The person who never splits the bill evenly is not being difficult. They are paying for what they ordered, the actual food, the actual drink, the actual evening they chose to have, without funding the difference between that and what someone else decided to have instead. Most people split the bill evenly because it feels easier. These people pay what they ordered because they know that easy and fair are rarely the same thing. And the person who pays only what they ordered is not making dinner transactional. They are making it honest, which turns out to be a different thing from what the table usually assumes it is. There is a moment people who never split the bill evenly all describe in almost the same way. It is not the first separate check. It is not the calculation that first made the transfer visible. It is an ordinary dinner, the bill arriving the same way it always does, the table reaching for the familiar question and giving the same answer they always give now, without hesitation, without apology, without the particular self-consciousness of someone doing something the table finds difficult. Not because the money matters more than the evening, because knowing what the evening cost, exactly, accurately, without a transfer built into the number, is simply how they have always approached a bill, the same way they approach everything else with a price on it, with the quiet insistence that the number be the right one. Not because generosity is wrong, because generosity is a choice, and choices, unlike defaults, are actually made. The bill was never the point. What knowing exactly what you owed said about everything else was. 10 years from now, nobody remembers who ordered the wine. They ask whether you ever once paid for someone else's evening while believing you were just splitting it evenly. Do you always split the bill? And has anyone ever made you feel like asking for separate checks was the less generous choice? Drop it below. We read every single one.